Hi, welcome, and hopefully you're here to see this video about some test score improvement opportunities for your student. Okay, so we got this information and maybe you have some questions or maybe you're just here to check out the cool video. Either way, we're going to try and help this understanding out just a little bit. So, general idea as a teacher, we want to help students improve their performance in test scores and we want to reward them for that appropriately. But too often, this is kind of what happens. You know, we kind of have the start of the year, the first tests, and some students do well and they score really high, like up in the 80s or the hundreds or the 60s, and they're doing okay up here. But then you have some students down here, and these students that start up high, sometimes they even come down too. And occasionally, you have a few students that just rock it all year long, no problems, because they never have to deal with any type of issues or they work through them really, really well. But a lot of times we have students that do more of this thing where they have issues and they drop in performance, or they drop and then they go back up and then they drop and then they go back up. And then the problem with that is that a teacher is usually looking at the average of those to try and balance out that score. And they say, okay, so here's my points, from each of these tests, and if I were to average them out, that equals about here. And if I were to average out these points here from this other test, let's do a different color there. So if from these other tests, the orange ones, I would average those out. And then you got these kind of high, medium, or low scores, and we're not sure if that really accurately represents. So we're going to try something different. The general idea, a student takes a Unit 1 test. And a lot of times, then they move on to Unit 2 and they forget about Unit 1. But then at the very end, they take this final that says, let's say it goes over Units 1 through 6. It's like, oh wait, I had to remember Unit 1 even though we kind of moved on and forgot about it. Well, we're going to build in some better retention along with this idea. Their second test, number 2, is going to be on Units 1 and 2. And then we are going to do Units 1 and 3, and so on. And we just keep building this cumulative test. What that does for us is, let's say when a student is taking Units 1 through 4 test, they're essentially testing the same stuff that they were doing in Unit 1. But maybe at this point, they're a lot better at it. And because they're a lot better at it, their performance is higher, and we want to reward that. So let's break this down and see what that would look like. So let's say Unit 1, they score, I don't know, they do okay. They get a 70%. That's a passing with a low C. And right now, I'm having this calculate some things here in this sheet where it's going to calculate the average of all the tests that we've done so far. And it's going to say the maximum between either the average or the most recent test score that was given. Now let's say for their next test, they actually drop a little. Something happened, broke up with a girlfriend, lost the game, whatever's going on. But the pressure got to them, or they just didn't prepare and they were lazy about it. But this time they score like a 55. Okay, so their average would be 62.5. And to be fair, a teacher would try and say, I know not every day is like that, so I'm going to take the average. But then let's say they bounce back, and on test 3, not only do they improve upon that 55, but they do even better than the first one. They really study this time. They know the content from Units 1, 2, and 3, and now they're rocking an 85. They're really doing well on all the content from Units 1, 2, and 3. Earlier, the student would barely have gotten back to a 70% just to make up for that low 55%. But what we're going to do is at this moment, we're going to say, that's awesome. Your average was a 70, but because you outdid your average by scoring 85, we're going to give you the 85. Then you might be saying, well, now so they have to kind of start low and then keep improving from there? Not necessarily, because if you don't show progress, that's going to hurt too. So let's say for the next test, they go down a little bit, but only this time to 80. They're still doing pretty decent here. Now their average is 72.5. That did drop a little. And their recent was 85. Now it's 80. But the recent test score, 80 in this case, is still more than the average test score, 72.5, right here. So we have 80 is the big one, so that's the student's test score. Now let's see again, test 5, they bomb. Something happened. They didn't get the content, they didn't prepare, whatever happened, and they got a 50%. This killed them. They're at a 68%. Now, we're not going to penalize them by giving them the 50, but they have a 68%, so they have that average. Now, they're looking at the final, test number 6, or however many tests we're going to have here, and they say, I want to get back up to a high score. All they got to do to improve that test score is outdo 68. So let's say they outdo 68 and they get back to an 80% again. Then we give them not their average, which was 70, but we give them the 80%, and it kind of discounts these two low scores because in reality they had an average closer to 80 anyways without those two outliers. This is just good data analysis. Taking out your outliers and also rewarding progress is the definite incentive for the students. All right, so let's look at maybe something completely different. Let's look at a student that's just rocking it the whole time, 95, and then 90, but they're slowly going down, 85. We're not going to penalize this student and give them that 85. We're going to say that 95 helped them out, so now they are averaging 90. But they keep going down, and they get like an 80. Well, they still have an 87.5 average, and they keep going down, and then they have another, well, let's say they have another 80, and then another 75. So this student actually started really strong at 95 and just slowly went down. We would hope that that would not happen, because if that does happen, they're going to get an average. And this average, in this case, is 84%, which is still very respectable as far as an assessment score goes. But, you know, we'll still be fair in that sense. We're not going to give them a 75 on the final exam just because it covered units 1 through 6. We'll reward some of that earlier performance. Now let's say a student says, I know how to play the game. I know how to cheat. I'm going to just say, I'm going to get 10 on the first one. And I'm going to go really slow at this. And I'm going to get 20 on the second one. And I'm just going to keep outdoing my average, Mr. Butler here. And I'm going to get, whoops, I don't want to do 30. Let's say I want to do 30 on the next one. And then I keep going. And I'm just going up 40. Look at this. I'm growing. My progress is showing. But they got to be really careful. Because if you're getting low test scores again and again, you're building a bad habit. And that bad habit kind of becomes more consistent of a pattern for you. Let's say that I just went to like 60 on the next one. It's like, oh, wow. Now I'm passing with a D- on this. And I'm doing okay right there. But the student doesn't have much to fall back on. Their average is a 32. So they better keep doing better. They have to keep going higher and higher. Now, if they were to, have somewhat of a loss here because they just haven't done the preparations and they get back down to a 50. We're not going to give them their average, which was a 35. They at least outdid their average, and they got the 50. But it's not good to think, okay, if I just kind of do poorly at the beginning and just kind of slowly get better, it's not going to do me any good because it's just building bad habits there. Bad habits don't make good grades and good performance. So, all right, let's say the person bombed the first one and then they rocked the second one and they got 90. Not 909, but 90. Their average would have been 60, but we're going to give them the 90. And they say, oh, that was so hard, but I'm going to go back and get my 30 again. And then they say, okay, now I'm at a 50% average, so I'm going to at least keep that. But no, wait, I liked being really high in the A's, so I'm going to get my 90 again. Oh, I'm back to 90. So it's possible to kind of roller coaster as a pattern too. So you could have this like low, high pattern. but you don't want to, bounce all over the place. We do want to try and build in steady improvement. And then let's say they do another one and they get a 90% one more time, and then they really struggle here, and they don't do well on their final, and they get a 30%. This kind of erratic behavior to us shows inconsistency where a student is sometimes working and sometimes not. And that is a time when we would take in their average. Because we can't really reward them for these 90s when they did not just those times, but once, twice, 3 times really slacked off on these tests. That's at least half the time. So then we will, take in that average into account. That'll balance it out. All right, so that's mostly this explanation. I suggest you kind of watch it more than once, and hopefully this will alleviate a lot of frustrations. This kind of replaces the need to do a test retake, to do error score analysis and get credit back for looking at your errors kind of thing, because you're going to just retake on the next test, and then you retake on the next test. And then our final exam is actually a lot easier than you think, because it's really just the next test. You've been preparing for it all semester because each test has been building on itself. All right, so that's that. Please watch the video again. I know that maybe it didn't make sense the first time, but it will the third, maybe even the fourth time. All right, have a good night.